The Babus of Nayanjore. Once upon a time, the Babus at Nayanjore were famous landholders. They were noted for their princely extravagance. They would tear off the rough border of their dhaka muslin because it rubbed against their delicate skin. They could spend many thousands of rupees over the wedding of a kitten. And on a certain grand occasion, it is alleged that in order to turn night into day, they lighted numberless lamps and showered silver threads from the sky to imitate sunlight. Those were the days before the flood. The flood came. The line of succession among these old world Babus with their lordly habits could not continue for long. Like a lamp with too many wicks burning, the oil flared away quickly and the light went out. Kailash Babu, our neighbor, is the last relic of this extinct magnificence. Before he grew up, his family had very nearly reached its lowest ebb. When his father died, there was one dazzling outburst of funeral extravagance and then insolvency. The property was sold to liquidate the debt. What little ready money was left over was altogether insufficient to keep up the past ancestral splendors. Kailash Babu left Nayanjore and came to Calcutta. His son did not remain long in this world of faded glory. He died, leaving behind him an only daughter. In Calcutta, we are Kailash Babu's neighbors. Curiously enough, our own family history is just the opposite of his. My father got his money by his own exertions and prided himself on never spending a penny more than was needed. His clothes were those of a working man, and his hands also. He never had any inclination to earn the title of Babu by extravagant display, and I myself, his only son, owe him gratitude for that. He gave me the best education, and I was able to make my way in the world. I am not ashamed of the fact that I am a self made man. Crisp banknotes in my safe are dearer to me than a long pedigree in an empty family chest. I believe this was why I disliked seeing Kailash Babu drawing his heavy checks on the public credit from the bankrupt bank of his ancient Babu reputation. I used to fancy that he looked down on me because my father had earned money with his own hands. I ought to have noticed that no one showed any vexation towards Kailash Babu except myself. Indeed, it would have been difficult to find an old man who did less harm than he. He was always ready with his kindly little acts of courtesy in times of sorrow and joy. He would join in all the ceremonies and religious observance of his neighbors. His familiar smile would greet young and old alike. His politeness in asking details about domestic affairs was untiring. The friends who met him in the street were perforce ready to be buttonholed, while a long string of questions of this kind followed one another from his lips. My dear friend, I am delighted to see you. Are you quite well? How is Shashi? And Dada? Is he all right? Do you know, I have only just heard that Madhu's son has got fever. How is he? Have you heard? And Haricharan Babu? I have not seen him for a long time. I hope he is not ill. What's the matter with Rakhal? And how are the ladies of your family? Kailash Babu was spotlessly neat in his dress on all occasions, though his supply of clothes was sorely limited. Every day he used to air his shirts and vests and coats and trousers carefully and put them out in the sun, along with his bed quilt, his pillowcase, and the small carpet on which he always sat. After airing them, he would shake them and brush them and put them carefully away. His little bits of furniture made his small room decent and hinted that there was more in reserve if needed. Very often, for want of a servant, he would shut up his house for a while. Then he would iron out his shirts and linen with his own hands and do other little menial tasks. After this, he would open his door and receive his friends again. Though Kailash Babu, as I have said, had lost all his landed property, he had still some family heirlooms left. There was a silver cruet for sprinkling scented water, a filigree box for otto of roses, a small gold salver, a costly ancient shawl, and the old-fashioned ceremonial dress and ancestral turban. These he had rescued with the greatest difficulty from the moneylender's clutches. On every suitable occasion, he would bring them out in state and thus try to save the world famed dignity of the Babus of Nayanjore. At heart, the most modest of men, in his daily speech, he regarded it as a sacred duty owed to his rank, to give free play to his family pride. His friends would encourage this trait in his character with kindly good humor, and it gave them great amusement. The neighborhood soon learned to call him their Thakur Dada. They would flock to his house and sit with him for hours together. To prevent his incurring any expense, one or other of his friends would bring him tobacco and say, Thakur Dada, this morning some tobacco was sent to me from Goya. Do take it and see how you like it. Thakur Dada would take it and say it was excellent. He would then go on to tell of a certain exquisite tobacco which they once smoked in the old days of Nayanjore at the cost of a guinea an ounce. I wonder, he used to say, if anyone would like to try it now. I have some left and can get it at once. Everyone knew that if they asked for it, then somehow or other the key of the cupboard would be missing, or else Ganesh, his old family servant, had put it away somewhere. You never can be sure, he would add, where things go to when servants are about. Now, this Ganesh of mine, I can't tell you what a fool he is, but I haven't the heart to dismiss him. Ganesh, for the credit of the family, was quite ready to bear all the blame without a word. One of the company usually said at this point, Never mind, Thakur Dada, please don't trouble to look for it. This tobacco we will smoke will do quite well. The other would be too strong. Then Thakur Dada would be relieved and settle down again, and the talk would go on. When his guests got up to go away, Thakur Dada would accompany them to the door and say to them on the doorstep, Oh, by the way, when are you all coming to dine with me? One or other of us would answer, Not just yet, Thakur Dada, not just yet. We will fix a day later. Quite right, he would say, quite right. We had much better wait till the rains come. It's too hot now. And a grand rich dinner such as I should want to give you would upset us in weather like this. But when the rains did come, everyone was very careful not to remind him of his promise. If the subject was brought up, some friend would suggest gently that it was very inconvenient to get about when the rains were so severe, and therefore it would be much better to wait till they were over. Thus, the game went on. Thakur Dada's poor lodging was much too small for his position, and we used to condole with him about it. His friends would assure him that they quite understood his difficulties. It was next to impossible to get a decent house in Calcutta. Indeed, they had all been looking out for years for a house to suit him. But I need hardly add, no friend had been foolish enough to find one. Thakur Dada used to say, with a sigh of resignation, Well, well, I suppose I shall have to put up with this house after all. Then he would add with a genial smile, But you know, I could never bear to be away from my friends. I must be near you. That really compensates for everything. Somehow, I felt all this very deeply indeed. I suppose the real reason was that when a man is young, stupidity appears to him the worst of crimes. Kailash Babu was not really stupid. In ordinary business matters, everyone was ready to consult him. But with regard to Nayanjore, his utterances were certainly void of common sense, because out of amused affection for him, no one contradicted his impossible statements. He refused to keep them in bounds. When people recounted in his hearing the glorious history of Nayanjore with absurd exaggerations, he would accept all they said with the utmost gravity and never doubted, even in his dreams, that anyone could disbelieve it. When I sit down and try to analyze the thoughts and feelings that I had toward Kailash Babu, I see that there was still deeper reason for my dislike. I will now explain. Though I am the son of a rich man and might have wasted time at college, my industry was such that I took my MA degree in Calcutta University when quite young. My moral character was flawless. In addition, my outward appearance was so handsome that if I were to call myself beautiful, it might have thought a mark of self estimation, but could not be considered an untruth. There could be no question that among the young men of Bengal, I was regarded by parents generally as a very eligible match. I was myself quite clear on the point and had determined to obtain my full value in the marriage market. When I pictured my choice, I had before my mind's eye wealthy father's only daughter, extremely beautiful and highly educated. Proposals came pouring in to me from far and near. Large sums cash were offered. I weighed these offers with rigid impartiality in the delicate scales of my own estimation. But there was no one fit to be my partner. I became convinced with the poet Bhabubhuti that in this world's endless time and boundless space, one may be born at last to match my sovereign grace. But in this puny modern age and this contracted space of modern Bengal, it was doubtful if the peerless creature existed as yet. Meanwhile, my praises were sung in many tunes and in different meters by designing parents. Whether I was pleased with their daughters or not, this worship which they offered was never unpleasing. I used to regard it as my proper due because I was so good. We are told that when the gods withhold their boons from mortals, they still expect their worshippers to pay them fervent honor and are angry if it is withheld. I had that divine expectance strongly developed in myself. I have already mentioned that Thakur Dada had an only granddaughter. I had seen her many times, but had never mistaken her for beautiful. No thought had ever entered my mind that she would be a possible partner for myself. All the same, it seemed quite certain to me that some day or other Kailash Babu would offer her, with all due worship, as an oblation at my shrine. Indeed, this was the inner secret of my dislike. I was thoroughly annoyed that he had not done so already. I heard that Thakur Dada had told his friends that the Babus of Nayanjore never craved a boon. Even if the girl remained unmarried, he would not break the family tradition. It was this arrogance of his that made me angry. My indignation smoldered for some time, but I remained perfectly silent and bore it with the utmost patience because I was so good. As lightning accompanies thunder, so in my character a flash of humor was mingled with the mutterings of my wrath. It was of course impossible for me to punish the old man merely to give vent to my rage, and for a long time I did nothing at all. But suddenly one day such an amusing plan came into my head that I could not resist the temptation of carrying it into effect. I have already said that many of Kailash Babu's friends used to flatter the old man's vanity to the full. One, who was a retired government servant, had told him that whenever he saw the Chota Lat Sahib, he always asked for the latest news about the Babus of Nayanjore. And the Chota Lat had been heard to say that in all Bengal, the only really respectable families were those of the Maharaja of Kasipur and the Babus of Nayanjore. When this monstrous falsehood was told to Kailash Babu, he was extremely gratified and often repeated the story. And wherever after that he met this government servant in company, he would ask, along with other questions. Oh, by the way, how is the Chota Lat Sahib? Quite well, did you say? Ah, yes. I'm so delighted to hear it. And the dear Mem Sahib? Is she quite well too? Ah, yes. And the little children, are they quite well also? Ah, yes. That's very good news. Be sure and give them my compliments when you see them. Kailash Babu would constantly express his intention of going someday and paying a visit to the Lord Sahib. But it may be taken for granted that many Chota Lads and Bada Lads would also come and go, and much water would pass down the Hooghly before the family coach of Nayanjore would be furbished up to pay a visit to a government house. One day I took Kailash Babu aside and told him in a whisper, Thakur Dada, I was at the levee yesterday, and the Chota Lad Sahib happened to mention the Babus of Nayanjore. I told him that Kailash Babu had come to town. Do you know, he was terribly hurt because you hadn't called? He told me he was going to put etiquette on one side and pay you a private visit himself this very afternoon. Anybody else could have seen through this plot of mine in a moment. And if it had been directed against another person, Kailash Babu would have understood the joke. But after all, that he had heard from his friends, the government servant, and after all his own exaggeration, a visit from the lieutenant government seemed the most natural thing in the world. He became very nervous and excited at my news. Each detail of the coming visit exercised him greatly, most of all his own ignorance of English. How on earth was that difficulty to be met? I told him there was no difficulty at all. It was aristocratic not to know English. And besides, the lieutenant government always brought an interpreter with him, and he had expressly mentioned that this visit was to be private. About midday, when most of our neighbors are at work and the rest are asleep, a carriage and pair stopped before the lodging of Kailash Babu. Two flunkies in livery came up the stairs and announced in loud voice, "The Chota Lad Sahib has arrived." Kailash Babu was ready, waiting for him in his old-fashioned ceremonial robes and ancestral turban, and Ganesh was by his side, dressed in his master's best suit of clothes for the occasion. When the Chota Lad Sahib was announced, Kailash Babu ran panting and puffing and trembling to the door and led in a friend of mine in disguise with repeated salams, bowing low at each step and walking backward as best as he could. He had his old family shawl spread over a hard wooden chair and he asked the Lad Sahib to be seated. He then made a high-flown speech in Urdu, the ancient court language of the Sahibs, and presented on the golden salver a string of golden mohurs, the last relics of his broken fortune. The old family servant Ganesh, with an expression of awe bordering on terror, stood behind with the scent sprinkler, drenching the Lad Sahib, and touched him gingerly from time to time with the otto of roses from the filigree box. Kailash Babu repeatedly expressed his regret at not being able to receive his honor Bahadur with all the ancestral magnificence of his own family estate at Nayanjore. There he could have welcomed him properly with due ceremonial. But in Calcutta, he was a mere stranger and sojourner, in fact, a fish out of water. My friend, with his tall silk hat on, very gravely noted, "I need hardly say that according to English custom, the hat ought to have been removed inside the room. But my friend did not dare to take it off for fear of detection, and Kailash Babu and his old servant Ganesh were sublimely unconscious of the breach of etiquette." After a 10 minutes interview, which consisted chiefly of nodding the head, my friend rose to his feet to depart. The two flunkies in livery, as had been planned beforehand, carried off in state the string of gold mohurs, the gold salver, the old ancestral shawl, the silver scent sprinkler, and the otto of roses filigree box. They placed them ceremoniously in the carriage. Kailash Babu regarded this as the usual habit of Chota Lad Sahibs. I was watching all the while from the next room. My sides were aching with suppressed laughter. When I could hold myself in no longer, I rushed into a further room suddenly to discover in a corner a young girl sobbing as if her heart would break. When she saw my uproarious laughter, she stood upright in passion, flashing the lightning of her big dark eyes in mine, and said with a tear choked voice, "Tell me, What harm has my grandfather done to you? Why have you come to deceive him? Why have you come here? Why? She could say no more. She covered her face with her hands and broke into sobs. My laughter vanished in a moment. It had never occurred to me that there was anything but a supremely funny joke in this act of mine, and here I discovered that I had given the cruelest pain to this tenderest little heart. All the ugliness of my cruelty rose up to condemn me. I slunk out of the room in silence like a kicked dog. Hitherto, I had only looked upon Kusum, the granddaughter of Kailash Babu, as a somewhat worthless commodity in their marriage market, waiting in vain to attract a husband. But now I found, with a shock of surprise, that in the corner of that room a human heart was beating. The whole night through, I had very little sleep. My mind was in a tumult. On the next day, very early in the morning, I took all those stolen goods back to Kailash Babu's lodgings, wishing to hand them over in secret to the servant Ganesh. I waited outside the door and, not finding anyone, went upstairs to Kailash Babu's room. I heard from the passage Kusum asking her grandfather in the most winning voice, Dada, dearest, do tell me all that the Chota Lad Sahib said to you yesterday. Don't leave out a single word. I'm dying to hear it all over again. And Dada needed no encouragement. His face beamed over with pride as he related all manner of praises which the Lat Sahib had been good enough to utter concerning the ancient families of Nayanjore. The girl was seated before him, looking up into his face and listening with rapt attention. She was determined, out of love for the old man, to play her part to the full. My heart was deeply touched, and tears came to my eyes. I stood there in silence in the passage while Thakur Dada finished all his embellishments of the Chota Lad Sahib's wonderful visit. When he left the room at last, I took the stolen goods and laid them at the feet of the girl and came away without a word. Later in the day, I called again to see Kailash Babu himself. According to our ugly modern custom, I had been in the habit of making no greeting at all to this old man when I came into the room. But on this day, I made a low bow and touched his feet. I'm convinced the old man thought that the coming of the Chota Lad Sahib to his house was the cause of my new politeness. He was highly gratified by it, and an air of benign serenity shone from his eyes. His friends had looked in, and he had already begun to tell again at full length the story of the Lieutenant Governor's visit, with still further adornments of a most fantastic kind. The interview was already becoming an epic, both in quality and in length. When the other visitors had taken their leave, I made my proposal to the old man in a humble manner. I told him that, though I could never for a moment hope to be worthy of marriage connection with such an illustrious family, yet, etc., etc. When I made clear my proposal of marriage, the old man embraced me and broke out in a tumult of joy. I'm a poor man and could never have expected such great good fortune. That was the first and last time in his life that Kailash Babu confessed to being poor. It was also the first and last time in his life that he forgot, if only for a single moment, the ancestral dignity that belongs to the Babus of Nayanjore.